Hi, you guys. I wanted to go ahead and move forward with our introductory lecture today. So, again, we are still introducing A Small Place by Jamaica Kincaid, a short work of nonfiction, a memoir. Just a reminder that you can get this book online for free. You have an opportunity to go to the National Emergency Library and to create a free account, and they'll give you an opportunity to borrow this book for 2 weeks. It's part of what the world is doing for you as a result of the pandemic. You are, of course, also welcome to use it in your Kindle. I can see you possibly citing it in the future as a part of a counter narrative about imperialism. So, up to you. There you go. Free options. So guys, here's the reading schedule that we will use for A Small Place. You're welcome to peruse it. Like I said, I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes today, and then you'll have an opportunity to read part one of the text. Then we'll go ahead and tomorrow you'll be doing some discussion online with an assignment. The rest of our week will kind of be reasonable, but you'll note that next Friday, because your paper is due at midnight, you'll have an opportunity to use your language arts time on Friday the 15th of May to go ahead and submit your final draft of your essay. So that's the big overall plan. When we consider this text, I think the reason that I advocated so wholeheartedly that we include A Small Place in the 10th grade curriculum is that I think that, tourism is a fascinating, fundamentally important way to learn about the world. But there is a cost to tourism, and oftentimes the costs of tourism are something that tourists, as a result of the blindness of their privilege, don't necessarily realize the impact of their mere presence, what it harkens in their cultural memory. So the idea here is considering tourism. What you see on this slide would have been an in-class right had you had an opportunity to be in class. But the idea, when you consider yourself as a tourist, what kind of tourist are you? Now, I know that it's possible that some of you guys haven't yet had the opportunity to explore the outside world, but I think you can possibly imagine, on any given day when you wake up, are you interested in touring how, underprivileged people throughout history have had to endure the many obstacles that came their way? Or do you go to Disneyland? Both are good, but they're just fundamentally different ways that we approach traveling in foreign lands. So I'm asking you to consider this, and I want to share just kind of like where this particular text hit me again, the purpose for reading. So I will share with you what my sort of reflection would have looked like if I had been doing that reflection through a series of very old photographs. Um, the purpose for traveling. When I read A Small Place, I thought about, in particular, my travels in Africa. A picture that you see right here is actually on my 22nd birthday. I was in Abu Simbel, Egypt. I'm in the center holding the sign, and that is a group of lovely retirees who I took around to luxury hotels in the Middle East. During that time, I learned a lot about Egypt. I learned a lot during my time in Jordan and a lot during my time in Israel. But obviously, our travel in the Middle East had an impact, both on the individuals within our group, but definitely on the native population. And it's an impact that I was largely unaware of as a young person. I had a job. I had found a way to travel the world without costing my family any money. But what I have to appreciate is that I was complicit in a system that ultimately does further privilege. And we just want to be aware of when we are complicit in those types of systems. More about that as we continue on. This map that you see right here are the places that I have been fortunate enough to travel to in Africa, in large part because of the job that I did between college and graduate school. I was a travel director for Intrav. What you can see here is a variety of different places, but what I'm going to talk to you about today is a trip to Tanzania that I took in 2007. Tanzania, as you can probably see, is just below the equator, and I'm going to talk about some of the time I spent in Tanzania itself, but in particular in a small island called Zanzibar. Zanzibar, like Antigua, is a small place, but it's a small place on the opposite side of the slave trade. What you can see here is me in a small plane flying over a place called Lake Manyara in Tanzania. Summer vacation is on some level a myth for teachers. I was reading and planning animal farm lessons because I was going to go and teach that for the first time in the next fall. But what you want to appreciate is that I was going ahead and I was doing that as an opportunity to explore Tanzania. Here's a picture of me in a wildlife lodge, again in 2007, that we stayed at. Here is a picture of a lion that I took, a beautiful female lion, but I want to share with you, if we turned my camera slightly to the right, what it was that I actually saw in Serengeti National Park. This is what the lion walked away from after just a few minutes of sitting on that rock. So just know that even the isolation that you see in my photographs is a myth. I had an opportunity, like I said, to go to a small place called Zanzibar. And in this small place called Zanzibar, I had a little hut that overlooked the ocean, and I had an opportunity to swim. I chose to go into the town to tour as well and to see what types of people lived in Zanzibar in a current day. This is an example of a market. As you can see, the population has different standards of dress for men and women, but you can see the relatively up-to-date motorcycles in the recent foreground. This was a fruit stand and a fish market. This was just me turning the camera in a slightly different direction. You get a better sense of the way that infrastructure is on some level homemade. This is again their fish market, and this is somebody who's getting some of the liquid out of sugarcane. I traveled around Zanzibar as a tourist. One of the places that I saw traveling as a tourist was called the Anglican Christ Church Cathedral. And the Anglican Christ Church Cathedral is built on the former slave market site, because Zanzibar, though it is a beautiful beach destination, and though Tanzania is a beautiful place to go and to watch animals and to consider the way they live, what Zanzibar ultimately was at the beginning was a place where people were sold. And I had an opportunity to go ahead and to tour what it is that happened on this particular site in the 1800s. Statues in pits in the ground are reminiscent of the inhumanity of the slave experience. Unfortunately, primary sources accounts of these individuals' lives are almost non-existent, and one sign I took a picture of here is this one showing what an underground room looked like after slaves were brought in. It was rare that they were kept in pits outside, but there was a small hut and a big hole in the entrance. And what you'll see on the next slide is where slaves were stuffed. It's a tiny hole, and this is where they were put before they were taken on the long ship rides. Those long ship rides that for many ended in Antigua. The reason that I take you guys through a 3 or 4 minute description of a trip that I took in 2007 in Africa is because, like I said, Jamaica Kincaid's book made me think deeply about what my tourism has meant to individuals in places that I've been, and it has reminded me of the blindness to the experience of others, that the money and the dollars that I spend in a foreign land, what that shows about my interest. Trying to go and see many places, I still believe is incredibly important, and nothing replaces an actual travel experience. But we do have memoir, we do have these nonfiction accounts, in spite of the fact that tourism is complicated morally, and in spite of the fact that when we read some of these memoirs, it'll cause us to understand some challenging things about ourselves. So I reflected a lot as I read A Small Place for the first time. I think many of you will as well. I'd like you guys to take a moment and pause this video and read these reviews of A Small Place. The first 3 are more positive, I think, and then the last 2 are not. So pause and take a moment to look at these. Salman Rushdie, you might note, is the author of Haroun and the Sea of Stories, as well as many other books, but that was a book club book that was done this year. Guys, I want you to know that within this text, there will probably be references to a variety of different things that you're unfamiliar with historically. Should we have been in class before we actually started, we would have spent a couple of days doing this exact historical research. Each of you would have chosen a topic and you would have presented in your small groups to each other, and fun would have been had by all. Just know that you'll want to go ahead possibly and Google these things and consider sort of the broader impact, because each of these 12 things are things that Jamaica Kincaid sort of brings up kind of casually. You are by no means required to do any sort of jigsaw work here. I just wanted to kind of bring that up as things I would have taught you if we weren't pared down to essential new learning. Okay, the last literary piece I want to share before I ask you guys to go ahead and start reading today is considering this form. Like we said, this is not a novella, it's not fiction, right? This is a memoir. It is a book of travel writing. It is an autobiography. It's a short work of creative nonfiction. And I think the students in my class all tend to pretty much understand what all of those words mean. However, However, most of my students are not familiar with the form called the Jeremiad. A Jeremiad is a particular type of sort of antiquated form that originated among 17th century New England Puritans. Puritans believed strongly in their moral superiority and that they were ultimately there to go ahead and be a beacon of truth and, a set of really heavenly leaders on earth. But what ultimately the Jeremiad form began, okay, as a form of ritualistic complaint and self-reproach, because Puritans were very concerned about the fact that they weren't good enough at being Puritans, and that self-consciousness sort of allowed people to go ahead and denounce each other, as denounce themselves, for societal ills. So in the long run, Jeremiads were named after the biblical prophet Jeremiah. It's an elusive name, and like we said, they are characterized by a long list of problems in society. Basically, they often ask society to repent. They often ask society to go ahead and to save itself, in order to more accurately fulfill the social contract, or the social covenant. There are three parts within a traditional Jeremiad: the citing of God's promise, the lamenting, like saying hey, there's really great things that can possibly happen in the world, right? And we are in their mind in created in God's form. These people also went ahead and lamented the current moral decline of society, much like they believed that people were in God's form. They believed that people were failing miserably at successfully fulfilling the promise of Christianity. And then they ultimately prophesied the promise's imminent fulfillment. They believed that they were going to be successful if the right amount of contrition and the right amount of changing form happened. So the three portions of the Jeremiad gave it some structure. Now you probably notice that Jamaica Kincaid has 4 sections within her narrative. Remember, this is not a traditional Jeremiad. She's using the Jeremiad form in order to prove a point, and that's something that many contemporary authors might choose to do. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, why might Kincaid have resurrected the Jeremiad form for a small place, and what about her story made her switch it from 3 to 4 sections? What is the 4th section? How does the original structure of the Jeremiad align with the 4 sections of a small place? And that's some work we'll go back and do once we get to the end of the text. We also might want to consider, how might using an American writing form enhance or detract from her arguments about culture? One of the things that one of the things she's going to say in A Small Place is that one generation of people in Antigua was kind of obsessed with British culture, like the older generation, sort of the 50s and 60s, and then the people that grew up a little bit later, the people that were, coming of age in the sort of 70s and 80s, were obsessed with American culture. So she writes in English to Jamaica Kincaid, and she uses an American writing form. She manipulates an American writing form, and you want to consider whether that enhances or detracts from her arguments about culture. So what I would like you guys to go ahead and do is, I'd like you guys to take an opportunity to read the first section of the text. Okay, now obviously we're not going to go ahead in class and annotate the first paragraph and then have a discussion in a small group, but this is what we would have looked at. So I would love for you guys to go ahead and in particular focus on just really critically thinking about that first paragraph, what types of sentences she uses, what point of view she uses, right? Why is Europe worse off than the United States in her opinion, possibly? And then I'd like you guys to go ahead and I'd like you to read part one of A Small Place. So I think it's about 18 pages in the text. And I'd like you to go ahead and describe your reaction. What I did is I tended to underline lines within the text that were like incredibly powerful to me. When I read through this text, the things that make me, incredibly upset, makes me grow as a human. All of those individual lines, like I said, were the reason I thought we should read it. So read on, my friends, and for the rest of our time today, and then tomorrow we'll have some processing of this work. Thank you, guys.